Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the launch of Nairobi Print Project. Sorry, I said good morning or evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sheila. I am in the background today. I just wanted to welcome you all to the conversation. This is our very first webinar as Nairobi Print Project, and we wanted to introduce the project to you and allow you also to maybe hear the background story of how it came to be. And we chose today to be in conversation with a good friend of ours, Syowia Kyambi, who's an artist based in Nairobi, also the founder of Untethered Magic, and Jessica Atieno, who is the founder also of Nairobi Print Project, and also a graduate of the School of the Art Institute, Chicago. So I'm just going to hand it over to them now to start the session. If you have any questions, you can type it in the chat, and we'll tackle them towards the end. And also just to note that the session is being recorded. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You know, when you say that, I've just remembered me and Syowia, we are alma mater.
Yes. But I think your time at SAIC might be very different to mine.
Very different, yeah, probably. Even now, and as opposed to when I was there, it's a bit different, so I can imagine. Yeah.
I was there back in 2000, 2001, before the film department was built.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. You were here when the students put up the, not strike, protest, the big protest?
No, I was around during the Palestine-Israel conflict kind of blowing up in the school campus as an issue. But yeah, and then when I was leaving the film department, was actually the building was new and was about to be opened. So that building didn't even exist in my time. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Stories for another, talking about studying abroad and politics and culture.
Yeah.
Cool. But today, it's all about Nairobi Print Project. It's funny to self-introduce yourself sometimes.
Yeah, but like share how it started.
Yeah, of course. It started with Asiko. So I met BC when I did Asiko in 2016 in Addis. And then it was such a huge opportunity. It was challenging. It was everything. It was all these things that people say about BC. And that really set up my relationship with her as a mentor and a guide and an anchor. And we're always talking about CCA and what it means to work, for her to work on the continent, really, and dedicate her wealth of knowledge to the continent. And she was talking to me about her plans for multiple CCAs all over Africa, and how she started CCA, how she studied abroad and came back. And I was like, oh, maybe I will start CCA in Nairobi. And she was like, yeah, why not? Go do it, just go. And all this time I was like, yeah, CCA Nairobi, joking around with the idea. And Nairobi Print Project was actually CCA Nairobi. Long story short, many years down the line, I looked back at Nairobi and I was like, what do we really need? You know, Kuana had shut down. Artists were working sort of independently and in small collectives. We still have places to show, really. There are not as many as you would want to, really, but we have places to show. But I was thinking really about, going to school and why I have to go outside for school and all these things. And I was like, really, Nairobi needs an infrastructure in terms of the scholarship, the funding, the space to make work with tools and materials that are not there. And the idea for CCA Nairobi changed to a communal studio, a print studio. And the more I thought about it, was like, a library would be nice, since Kwana is no longer, functioning in the way it used to be.
Yeah.
And the idea kept growing. I was like, what could support more of these conversations, more of this infrastructure? And I was like, how do we position ourselves globally? and it's the conversations with other people, collaborations with other artists and curators, not just in Nairobi, in the continent and elsewhere all over the world. And so the podcast was born, and it just came all together. And this is the story of Nairobi Print Project.
And maybe it's important to clarify for the audience, like Kuona Trust closed down, and what resuscitated itself was Kuona Artist Collective. And just to give another sense is that a lot of artists come together to share communal space and communal studios, and that's called collectives, but a lot of them until recently aren't really working like collectives. That's slowly starting to change. But before it was like a way to find a subsidized studio option, no? I think there's been a shift in terms of people coming together, not just for creating a subsidized space, but actually looking to work more communally and think communally. Although it's like, I'm talking like the last 3 or 4 years that I feel like this shift has started to take place. I think I had a little glimmer at the website, and everybody should do that. If you haven't seen it yet, what I can do is share the link real quick in our chat. Hang on, I'm doing a little bit of advertising for you here.
Thank
Because
you.
this is like, I think this is great, and it's super important and necessary. And I think the other brilliant bit about it is that I've done it wrong. NairobiPrintProject.com.
Yes.
I think what I find interesting about it is it's covering a heck of a lot of territory, you know. It's every kind of component of what you guys are doing and interested in is territory that interweaves with each other. B is absolutely necessary. C seems to be an organism that can function fluidly and online. It's not dependent on being within a physical location as such. And it's like, it feels very kind of open source and share like vibes to it, you know. I don't feel like I'm going to click somewhere and end up behind a paywall, you know, which I think is phenomenal, because there's a history of gatekeeping that exists, particularly in the Nairobi art scene, I would say. I can't speak for the other art scenes on the continent, where sadly we were kind of preconditioned to the idea that there's not enough for everybody. And this notion has really like made communal work, collaborative work, harder to achieve, because there's people are functioning from a place of how do you say, like struggling, or not really, like, yeah, if you feel there's not enough for everybody, then you're going to run after something and like cave it and hold onto it and claim it, and there's like less potential for growth in that sense. So I think the fact that the project is gearing towards an open source platform and a knowledge sharing platform and a knowledge building is really brilliant. So yay to that. And then I guess I wanted to share a couple of, I guess I have a couple of questions or things I'd like to unpack. First of all, there's one article you guys have about important spaces in or important exhibitions that have taken place or like shaped the African contemporary art. And you had the short century listed there under New York. And I could actually tell you, I just wanted to share a story, because the short century was, for me, I first saw it in Martin Gropiusbau, I think in 2000, before it came to Chicago. And it was the first time for me to ever see African art inside of a museum that was not like an ethnographic object. And mind you, this was the time when I was at SAIC, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. They had organized some sort of class trip to Germany to unpack the Holocaust, and I was there as a translator. And I kind of got the chance to see that show in the midst of that project. And there was a guy from Cameroon, I'll never forget it. First, there was a massive image of a man coming off a ship. from a war kind of after post-war with boots slung around his neck. Up and as you go up the staircase, and then inside it was a very long table, and there was a guy from Cameroon. We didn't know each other, and we were both in tears. And that was just such a high impact exhibition and moment. And then I went to the States. I was in Chicago at the time, and the show moved to Chicago, and it was really disappointing at how the show had been edited out and shifted in terms of its content. Who knows what's possible with space requirements and all that kind of stuff, but the advertising as well. So in Berlin, they had an advertising pack with a map of the African continent, giving like the historical information around the exhibition was still very much intact. And in Chicago, it was like stripped down from that. It was like the advertising was a map of the African continent with the words drawing, sculpture, painting, kind of graphically put in place. And I was like, oh, so all the historical knowledge, which African American community would have like superbly benefited from, and wider, obviously, but I, at the time in my early 20s, was thinking along those lines. This is getting omitted. And I felt like it was quite like a systematic omission. And there was a lot of works from South Africa, but it all goes into the politics of knowledge building, the politics of finances, and what kind of resources are available for which contexts, and what kind of image and narrative is being told in which space, right? So I wanted to bring that to the forefront as like something to discuss. And at around the same time, I had an experience of going into a museum, which was somebody's house, which had like musical instruments I played with as a child. And then I picked them up to play with, and I was like shouted at by a professor for like touching it and playing with it. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like, I'm not supposed to be able to do that with these objects. So maybe you can expand a little bit about the Nairobi Print Project and the kind of knowledge that's being generated and built, and your thoughts around like navigating those kinds of spaces in which stories are told and stories that are kind of omitted, and whether they're omitted on purpose or if you think it's just an autopilot system that we're in.
I will say that also in terms of my experience learning here. I have learned more about myself and my culture, my continent, my country being here than I was at home. One, because education, the arts education that is not rooted in our history. It's not rooted in, hey, look at African modernism, look at what are Nigerians doing in this time of history, what are Kenyans doing. It's not that. We are still learning about the canon. And when I came here, I was still learning that. The art history here is still the Monets, the all that art history, the one they make you take. It is still that. But you're here and you're looking at yourself, you're in a strange, you're away from the familiar. And your mind and your heart yearns for the familiar. So you go digging and digging and digging, and you want to learn more. Why is this like this? Why do I relate to people in this way? And then that brings you closer to your culture in that way. And when you start looking and you're not finding, you find them in small pockets, yeah? If you go to the museum still, you'll still see ethnographic stuff. More and more you will see like huge exhibitions that are impactful. Like a few years ago, I think last year, there was the Volta photo, there was Mimi Cherono here, the Art Institute. You will see that, but you go back home again and people are not also in conversation with what we ourselves are doing. There's huge stuff people are doing, but it's still in pockets. So there's need to create that synergy, that collaboration, have these conversations that position ourselves globally. And again, that information is also sometimes kept in your words, and sometimes it's also just not available. Sometimes it's also about exposure. I remember working at Corner. In my studio working there, when I think about it, I wasn't aware of all the resources available, even online for free, for me to do some research. And so having a place like the Print Project, where we are connecting really people to like hey, you're interested in feminism? Look at that article, it's free. Look at this video, it's free. Or look at what this artist is doing on the same topics you're interested in. So it creates that sort of collaboration, and you do not feel like you're not part of that global stage. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I have a question about this. You know, I wonder sometimes to myself, is it that you leave and therefore you find the resources that, what is it about not realizing the availability of things when situated? For me, I'm talking about being situated in Nairobi, and this artists not having access to stuff, but then you realize, oh, there's access. Or even, let's go to the pandemic, you know, there was Skype and Zoom and all of that existed pre-pandemic, but we weren't using it in the way that we did during the pandemic and post, but it was always present. It was a tool available. So what is it that happens? Like, what was it for you? Why did you have to travel to figure out that there are free resources available when the internet functions as well over here? And it's not usually, I've heard this number of times, and I've even seen it in motion. But it's like, I like, why do we have the self-hindrance on location, like autopilot? I haven't been able to unpack it.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of exposure, really. Much of it, like 90% of it, is exposure. You see, like when you're on Instagram and you see those hacks to do something, and you're like, how come I never thought of doing something like this? You know, it's like a hack. You've always done something a particular way, and people around you are still doing it in that particular way. And because of gatekeeping and all these things, you're not really exposed to a different way of doing stuff. And so when you're out of that situation and you see people doing stuff and you're like, oh, wow, people can do this. You mean you can just that and that? And then you look back at yourself and you're like, oh, my God, you know, I can do things differently. I have all the resources actually I need. It might not be all, but I have enough to do something. And it just takes other people, you know, seeing that and joining.
Yeah. I had a couple of thoughts about, like, oh God, okay, so there's a couple of things. One is about the archive, because I know you also have in your website a section to do with archive. And recently, I've been thinking a little bit, like, the question came at me about, you know, why am I consistently interested in using the archive and going to an archive or building an archive? Like, what is it about the archive? And I was trying to answer this question quite succinctly. And, you know, when you have interviews that aren't like written, it's very different than a conversation. So I had a different kind of thought process. And I started to think about the fact that, yes, I've always thought about, you know, you fill a gap and another one comes. That was a pre-thought, kind of when you have fermented bread and you push the air out and you've got another pocket comes and another pocket comes. But more so, I was really trying to get to the root of it for myself. And I think there's something to do with a gap not a gap, a foundation that's not there for me particularly. And I think and when I say not there, I'm probably speaking about a past self of mine, because I don't have those sensations now, but I can relate and understand them. And I think that the archive, or going back to that, was to look for a foundation to see the possibilities for the future. And there's something about an unrootedness, and I guess this ties in to what a lot of people feel, regardless of whether they're in the diaspora or located and working from here or located working from somewhere else. If by here I mean Kenya or East Africa, there's still like a lack or knowledge that's not known, or things that are unknown. And I think there's something about the archive about finding a footing or somewhere to step onto. And I don't know where that question is leading, but I guess I found it interesting and exciting that you had the archive pocket on your website as a theme, along with religion, along with what are your other themes? Identity, feminism. And I just thought, yeah, this is this is great. And I would like also push for a theme of like the intermixedness of all of it, right? It's like a mumbo section as well. Because there's something interesting about trying to unpack maybe or not seeing lack as a problem, but maybe as an asset, dare I say it? I'm not sure if I want to say it that way, but or to not be seen as a problem is maybe also where I'm getting at. Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about those thoughts.
I think I'm in my personal practice, I'm really passionate about history, and I believe that, I mean, we do not create in a vacuum. We used to say that all the time. We are engaging with material histories, we're engaging with political histories, we are rooted in those histories. And therefore we are the produce of all these things. The work, if you take a photograph or if you make a sculpture, it has a long history of people who have been doing that you still have to engage, whether you like it or not, really. And there's the situation in which you find yourself in as an artist. What are the thoughts? What inspires your hand? It's not in a vacuum. And so we draw from all these things. Yeah. And so how do we look forward if we do not know where we're coming from? Especially also because we've been focused on the canon for all this time. So what is it that we can draw from our history and ourselves to root ourselves, reroot ourselves, and therefore learn how to position ourselves in the future? It's creating that parallax, going forward, going back, going forward, going back.
Yeah. And maybe back is even a fictional space, right? That you can create if needed, if the access to that the factual grounding doesn't exist, because you've also got that in your Afrofuture section. Yeah, I think there's a wonderful article, and I tried to find it before, but I can look for it again later and share it with you. But it's by Elvera Osei. She talks about new, like this idea of new, and you keep hearing, oh, new work from the African continent. I think it ties into what you were just saying, because her point was that it's not new, it's just new for you. And that's like another thread of the narrative, and you were referencing the canon. Maybe you could unpack the canon a little bit by what you mean about that, or maybe we shouldn't even go there because it takes us back into this rat hole that we're trying to desperately get out of. But I do like this like when people are saying, oh, it's new and new and the first time and the only one, and those kinds of statements you have around artists and their work and exhibitions and curators and their work. That it's just new. You can just say it's new for you and keep it there, because actually there is this incredibly rich history, and just because you're not knowledgeable about it doesn't mean it's now new. And this is what I think the canon and this kind of Western gaze does to contemporary African art, and art from the diaspora. And there's a certain type of aesthetic that's expected, and there's a certain type of language around work that's expected. And that differs, I think, between like Western Europe and New York, and I don't know how it is for Latin America or Southeast Asia. But it's an obstacle that I think we face as practitioners who are working communally in building spaces, and building. I know you reference new knowledge. I'm always thinking about it as new ways of thinking about things, but those things are actually not necessarily new. Yeah, just some areas to unpack. Yeah, throwing that up.
I agree. I mean, even for us, some of these histories are new to us. You mentioned the article we have on our homepage. Some people still do not know these exhibitions happened. Major exhibitions that have traveled all over, but not even gone back to the continent. which is quite a huge loss, really, in my opinion. But some people still don't know that. And sometimes you also mentioned playing with the instruments and you being told, hey, this is,
naughty. I was
some
really
of these things, yeah. For us, the very ethnographic stuff, we look at them and you're like, sometimes you go to the museum, here at the AIC, there's lessons.
Yeah.
And I like seeing them, but I'm like, man, this is just a lesson.
Yeah.
But you're telling me that you can't explore any other modernism. There's an African modernism, artists who are doing amazing stuff that can be still in there other than this ethnographic stuff. And so I think for us also, it's looking into history to develop a language, because for a long time we did not have, or artists that in particular pockets of history did not have the language to talk about what they were doing, because they were doing all these things, modernism, Renaissance, and all this. We were doing all that, but in our own ways. So it's finding that language. When I'm talking of creating new knowledge, it's really finding a language to continue expressing what we are doing. And as artists move into experimental stuff, how do you find that? And I find it, like in my practice, reading and having conversations with other people has been really important in developing that. Because when I was going into like questioning also the idea of like, what is the place of an artist in ethnography? What is the place of an artist in archival histories? Do you sacrifice the aesthetic for the political, or the political for the aesthetic? All these questions become supported by scholars who are thinking through them, who are researching and have that language. So I plug into that language, I borrow, and I look at what other artists are doing, and I'm like, hey, they're doing something I like. It's almost what I want to do. So you get a visual there, and people are talking about this here, and they're like, I want to be part of that conversation, And so all these things is what are the pillars we are centering ourselves on: conversation, scholarship, in books, historians, writers. All of these people create that language, which is that new knowledge.
What do you think is, I don't know. I often find, I think what I'm enjoying about this project, and I don't really feel like it's a project as such. I know the name is Nairobi Print Project, but I'm like, it's more than a project. It's like a place, right? It's like a, I don't know, like a beast that has its space, and yes, it might have its lifespan, but it's not like, it doesn't feel like a one-time project. It feels like this is like an ongoing like platform that will have its own life and its own shifts, and it doesn't really have like an expiration date. It doesn't have a dependency on a particular type of funding model that will make it collapse. So, now I've lost my train of thought. In that, I guess the question is like, what I'm enjoying about, so there's twofold. One is we have a huge challenge with traveling, and traveling within the continent, traveling beyond the continent. It's all quite difficult, and I believe that's quite political and systematic. And the fact that this platform is online, in one sense, it's operating as an online vehicle, makes it actually quite political and quite powerful, because anybody can plug in from anywhere. It's got a freedom that we don't feel because of the confinements of movements that we experience as practitioners from the diaspora or from the African continent. But then there's also something about that point we had earlier about leaving and therefore getting some more clarity and exposure, and how, I guess the question is like maybe an unanswerable of like, how do you translate that on a site that's digital? Is that possible? Is it necessary? How do we give ourselves more access to mobility, to support systems, And yes, we're building our own systems that are like communal and supportive and not totally reliant on like external funding bodies. Those are being developed and built as we're speaking, like now. Yeah, and I think my prompt to you as well is, I guess, the prompt for the audience to also know that they can always support Nairobi Print Project by volunteering, by donations, by asking to come on and do collaborative projects, by submitting journals, right?
Mhm.
So there, yeah, I guess I'm asking us for a state of activity rather than passivity, but also being realistic in the challenges and the necessity of physical exchange and that exploration, but also the power within what you've developed as an online platform.
Mhm. I am quite passionate about open access. We have an open access statement on our website that's very direct and explicit, and I do love that it's it's very collaborative. Like, I'm collaborating with the author of that article. They don't know, but we are collaborating in making this available to people. And the whole project thrives on that. You know, everyone is donating their time on the team, but sometimes it is sad, and probably, you know, because you've set up Untethered Magic to get some support, not even sometimes monetary. Sometimes it's just, hey, share this article on your Instagram, share what Nairobi Project is doing, mention it to someone. You know, if you're thinking of a talk, why not plug us in? There needs to be more collaboration with people who are setting up such initiatives in Nairobi, and not just Nairobi, on the continent, everywhere. Print Project is not really a Nairobi project.
Yeah.
The name is Nairobi, yes, but it's not rooted, it's not just focused on Nairobi. We are expanding really the discursive and collaborative field between artists on the continent and the Black diaspora, because there needs to be more. I mean, there is stuff going on, but there's always room for more. We are going to commission our first round of texts this year that will still be open and available on the website. We're starting our podcast. These are all the moments someone can collaborate with us. If you're a writer, do you want to donate your time? Do you want to write an article? Do you like interesting conversations? Do you want to help us plan these conversations? Do pop-up libraries, because that's also a thing that we want to do. There's many ways to collaborate, because the work is a lot. And you mentioned in the beginning that the project is very ambitious. It's covering a lot. We're dreaming big.
Yeah.
So we need all the support, really. It's our project.
Yeah.
You know, BC used to tell me, just what is the new frontier?
Yeah.
You know, and she was like, who is doing exhibitions now? No one is doing exhibitions. And I'm looking at her like, you are doing exhibitions. She was still doing exhibitions at that time. But in essence, what she was telling me is that, like, think of something else. Don't just think of an exhibition. What is the new frontier? She was like, I want to curate on the book. I want to curate on the book pages. She wanted to get into publishing and all these things. And I'm always asking myself, like, what is that new frontier that we can all of us collaborate? The pandemic taught us a lot. You know, we do not have to have these borders to do stuff. We can connect online. I hate Zoom, but I'm still on Zoom right now. Anyone can listen to my podcast from anywhere in the world and be like, who is Syowia? I want to talk to her. I'm thinking of this project. I think I want to invite her for something. So collaboration pops up in any way.
In many forms.
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe we just ask if the audience, we're quite small today, if anybody wants to have any questions or has a question to ask or a comment. I think we can actually speak, because doesn't feel like it's a crowded room. And if you're feeling shy, you can also write something in the chat. And if there's nothing, I have an image I wanted to share with you. Have you seen my split banana image?
No. From
No.
where?
Okay, so I'm waiting for those questions. You people, don't let us down. Let me share my screen while we wait. Can you see my banana picture? Wait,
I see the line drawing.
hang on. That's not the
Oh
one.
yeah,
This one is the one.
I saw this. Where did I see this?
I've been referencing it a lot. It's been published somewhere and I keep using it in my talks and whatnot, but I do love it because I think it speaks to like all the things we've been speaking about in one way or another. I see it as a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this it was a banana I found in some rundown supermarket in Rongai. It used to be uchumi, but then it changed into something else. So I don't know what it is anymore, choppies or something. And I love it because it came from UG, I think, but it's got this banana. It was split, obviously, and somebody stitched it back together with banana fiber.
Oh wow!
Yeah, in order for it to cross the border. So you know the way produce can't cross the border if it's like defect or whatever, and I just find it absolutely lovely because it speaks so much to our innovation and the creativity, lack of like the not wanting to be wasteful, needing a whole bunch to actually cross a border. And yeah, so I think it's a fantastic metaphor for the things we were talking about, but I'm always referring to it. Yeah, and the other one I don't think is so important anymore. I just had it as it's from Tim Ingold, and it's what we use at Untethered Magic quite a lot. It's this foundation of being with and thinking with, rather than sitting on top. Or to, and it's something that has to be constantly practiced. It's not something that I've mastered it and done and dusted. No, it's something you have to always work at and unpack and kind of redo and unpack again. This to be with and to think with the land, with yourself, with others, but with and the in and the out and everything is actually one, rather than an act of domination or separation.